Hello and welcome to another 5-in-1 Mayaani Talks. I'm Mega of Mayaani Jewellery. For those of you who have been to this space before, welcome back. And for those of you who are new, welcome. This is a beautiful space I created so that we together could discuss jewelry and become more conscious of not only our jewelry's choices in the present, but also um, become more consciously aware of what it is we might want jewelry to look like, the face of jewelry, specifically luxury jewelry, to look like moving forwards and for the future generations ahead, especially as we have undergone so many shifts and changes as a race of, as a whole world of people, in terms of how we want to live our lives. We've been living our lives in ways, I'm sure many of you agree, perhaps, that have not necessarily left our natural world in the best state. And many of us, having become aware of this, are changing the way we live with our planet so that we can live in a more harmonious way with the world around us for the future, for there to be a bright, beautiful future in which many generations of humans can continue to enjoy what it is we enjoy right now: green spaces, fresh air, clean water, and all of the beautiful wildlife we still have present today, some of which, of course, are on the brink of extinction, but which we are working hard to try and ensure will still be present for the future generations to enjoy. So that's just one of the ways in which we have changed as people. We've become more aware of the importance of us carving out time for self care, because in that self care, we reconnect with ourselves on a deeper, more meaningful level. Many of us are working through generational or even just our own childhood traumas. Discovering that those are largely the source of a lot of mental health issues that are present in the world today. So, as we're changing, not only as a people, but as individuals, it's important for us, I feel, to start to think about where we want to make changes in our lives in terms of how we live our lives. Of course, many of us may already be making changes in terms of how we eat, what sort of music we listen to, the lifestyle we lead, um, all the way through to how we decide to dress ourselves, what sort of hairstyles we like to sport or wear, for want of a better word, including, I feel, what sort of jewelry we want to wear and adorn ourselves with as well. So, in this beautiful new video, I thought we could look at identity a bit more and how identity is something that has constantly evolved for human beings. It's evolving and changing for you and me right now as we sit here and speak. Our identity is forever changing, this being fact number one. Our identity is fluid. It's always been changing. It changes with age. It changes with a change of environment when you move from one country to another, for example. Even if it's just for a holiday and not necessarily to settle permanently, there are changes that take place to your identity through these experiences that you're living. It could just be experiences in your actual home location, in your workplace. It doesn't have to be with you moving abroad necessarily, but our identity is constantly changing. It's constantly moving. It's constantly evolving. And with that in mind, I wonder whether it's important for us to question whether some of our traditions when it comes to jewelry should evolve or be allowed to evolve, as it were, because jewelry traditions, as discussed before in some of my videos, have always evolved. We have just at some point in time decided that the traditions of that particular period were going to be our template for us to all copy and continue on with for goodness knows how long, really. But it's coming calling. I encourage us to call into question those jewelry traditions and whether they still have a place, in their fixed position, in the fixed and rigid patterns in which we are preserving them, or whether we should allow those jewelry traditions to be honored. Without a doubt, it's important to honor our tradition, important to honor our heritage. But whether we honor that more by allowing these jewelry traditions to evolve rather than holding them in a fixed, rigid template, which may not necessarily feel like it's as relevant anymore or like it's as meaningful to us. So, fact number two, jewelry has itself historically changed throughout our life stages. You probably have experienced potentially of either yourself directly or seeing people around you who always wore and perhaps still have these pieces in their jewelry wardrobe, wore certain pieces of jewelry all the time. But now Those pieces are locked away somewhere. They no longer wear them because they no longer identify with them. Our jewelry changes in different cultures to signify coming of age, for example. That's a big thing in many cultures, and it's often celebrated with a gift of jewelry. When you get married, there's lots of gifts of jewelry involved there as well to again signify this big change in your life that has taken place. Similarly, when you're widowed, jewelry changes then too, and certain cultures have certain ideas of what is and is not appropriate for you to wear in that situation. Jewelry can also be reserved for certain individuals. So, for example, the jewelry that is reserved for royalty would not be accessible to everyone. Jewelry reserved for people of certain social status would not be accessible to everyone. Jewelry has been used in certain cultures to distinguish between different castes and creeds. And I'd like to think we're generally moving away from these ideas and patterns, but they still exist in some parts of the world and are still more prevalent and prominent than we might like them to be. So jewelry has always changed throughout our lives anyway, in terms of the traditions that we observe when it comes to jewelry. And my question here is, when did jewelry be stop being allowed to be changed, basically, as we do? We as people are constantly evolving, as we mentioned. We're constantly changing our identity, shifting from one moment to the next. This very video itself is shifting our identity in some small way. And with those shifts, why is it that we perhaps in some cultures rigidly hold on to our ideas of traditional jewelry and the traditions surrounding jewelry? Why do we not let go of those and allow those to evolve just as we as individuals do? And if jewelry does not change, do we risk ourselves becoming something that belongs to jewelry instead of jewelry belonging to us? Because jewelry, adornment, is something that should belong to us. But if we do not allow it to evolve with us, do we risk us belonging to the jewelry rather than the jewelry belonging to us? Fact number 3, fixing jewelry in a specific mindset and a specific template can often freeze the identity of that jewelry. So instead of that jewelry being meaningful to us now, we know why we wear it. We know the rules around wearing it when it comes to traditions and traditional jewelry. This is. We know why we might be wearing it, what the traditions are surrounding the use of wear of this jewelry. We know what the traditions are around the materials we should be looking for. We know the traditions around when we should be wearing this jewelry. But if we actually ask ourselves, why are we wearing the jewelry? Can we actually come up with a deeply personal, more meaningful reason for why we are observing these jewelry traditions beyond this is the template I've been given, this is what I've been told, in our customs we wear this type of jewelry at this point, and this is the reason why? Beyond that, can it become more personal to us? I would argue that unless jewelry traditions become more deeply meaningful to us in some way, they are already extinct. They're at risk of becoming something we just go and see and observe and perhaps read about in a magazine, or which preserves history, or perhaps see in a glass box in a museum. So I welcome you to consider that and also to share your views on that. Do you feel that we have sometimes in certain cultures held on too tightly to jewelry tradition, so much so that we have lost our personal connection to our heritage through that jewelry? Because of course jewelry and adornment plays a very important role in many cultures for connecting us, for acting as a way for us to connect with our heritage and our history, and our culture and traditions. But if we, of course, detach ourselves from it, if we're just following these traditions, observing them simply to fulfill this template, this tick box exercise that we have in front of us, rather than making it more deeply meaningful and personal, do we actually risk losing our connection with our heritage altogether through that process? Fact number 4, I am looking at notes here. Fact number 4, reinterpreting our jewelry traditions can in some ways deepen the meaning behind those traditions for us. Now, reinterpreting heritage is something some people are very sensitive about the idea of, because when you reinterpret heritage or reinterpret traditions, there is always that association of fear of loss of identity, fear of your culture being diluted, fear of being the person that let it all go, that let it all disappear, that let us lose all those traditions and heritage forever. The fear is largely, I feel, what keeps us fixed to following these traditions the way that we do, instead of allowing them to evolve. However, if with a lot of care and conscious intentional work we actually evolve heritage or reinterpret heritage and jewelry traditions, for example, such as traditional jewelry pieces themselves. If an artist reworks traditional jewelry pieces with a very conscious mindset, they're very careful to preserve the meaning behind the use of certain materials if the use of certain materials is important. They're very careful to preserve certain narratives that we want to share when it comes to our jewelry, because there are certain stories and narratives we want to let go of when it comes to jewelry traditions and traditions in general. Certain Indian practices, for example, and traditions have not always honored women's voices, women's rights to freedom, have not always honored women as individuals. They've been very much left women in very subservient, submissive, almost disposable mindset that left people viewing us in that way. So certain narratives we don't want to carry forward, but if an artist preserves those narratives, we do want to carry forward to the future generations and is creating this reinterpretation of heritage in a very intentional way with love and care and devotion to the heritage, then reinterpreting heritage, I feel, can be a beautiful way of actually deepening our connection, deepening the meaning behind that heritage and that tradition that we're choosing to uphold. So within this, I ask you the question of whether you have ever loved something more when you have been allowed to make it your own versus loving something when you have to follow a rigid set of patterns or rules surrounding your enjoyment or use or wear of that. So when it comes to your jewelry wardrobe, I encourage you to think of that too. Are there pieces of jewelry that you love more because you're allowed to make them your own? And are there certain pieces that, yes, you love, but they don't give you that same freedom of loving them in the same way because there were some rules and patterns and templates you had to follow when it came to wearing those pieces of jewelry and when to wear them, why you're wearing them. And fact number 5, we are, of course, living our identity every single day. Our identity is living and breathing with us. This is why it is fluid and it's evolving. Should our jewelry not equally, our traditions when it comes to jewelry and our traditional jewelry, be allowed to equally be living as well? And if our jewelry and jewelry traditions are going to be living, then it follows that just as our living identity is constantly being reshaped by the world around us and our experiences every single day, it follows that our jewelry traditions would also be allowed to evolve and change and shift as we, of course, experience life and move through life. We know, many of us, that a lot of our experiences are changing because of this intercultural relationships we are developing. There's a lot of intercultural marriages, for example. There's a lot of children born from intercultural marriages who now have two cultures to call their own. And where does it leave them if jewelry traditions are not allowed to evolve? They're then left having to pick between one or the other. Perhaps you are not of a mixed interracial background, but you are a person who has grown up within a particular culture, but has moved to a different country, now adopted some of the cultures or the perhaps the habits or traditions of that culture within your own, such as, for example, Indians celebrating Christmas is just a random example right there. When you start to adopt certain elements of other cultures within your own culture, then you may not feel like you are traditional in the sense because your culture is now a fusion of cultures and not, for want of a better word, an authentic culture, if there is such a thing. Because I would argue authentic culture is the very culture that you are living and breathing and honoring and finding a deep, meaningful connection with every single day. So, with that comes a question. If jewelry is meant to mirror who we are, which is what adornment is, it's a powerful way of mirroring who we are, our values, what we stand for, where we come from, who we belong to in some cases. I mean, wedding rings, for example, were used to symbolize that. A lot of wedding jewelry was used to symbolize the fact that you belong to one family, now you belong to a new family. If our jewelry is meant to mirror who we are, what happens when we allow it to change just as we do? I welcome you to share your thoughts on identity and how or why or whether we should allow jewelry traditions, specifically in my case, Indian jewelry traditions, because across the globe, some cultures have much stronger jewelry traditions than others and they hold on to them a bit more tightly. But whether, just as identity is fluid and allowed to evolve and change, we should allow our jewelry traditions to do the same. Globally speaking, it's interesting to discover that we are actually very fixed in our mindset when it comes to luxury jewelry globally. This is not just restricted to one particular culture. It is partly because of cultural influences upon each other, largely due to colonization, for example. that these ideas became widespread. But essentially, what we have right now is a global community in which our ideas, irrespective of culture, are still very fixed when it comes to luxury jewelry. We very much perceive luxury jewelry as jewelry that's made of certain materials, sometimes even so specific as to say it's made of certain techniques or made using certain techniques. But definitely, we have fixed ideas that jewelry that's considered luxurious is made of certain materials. We have fixed ideas that jewelry that's considered luxury should be of a certain value, of a certain weight when it comes to the materials that are involved in making this jewelry. And it's, I would like to encourage us to think about whether we should continue on with this path, with this fixed mindset of what luxury jewelry looks like, or whether, just as our identity is changing and fluid and subject to change inevitably, no matter what we do, it's always changing, whether we should allow our fixed ideas, perhaps, which exist in some cases, whether we should allow our fixed ideas when it comes to luxury jewelry to equally evolve. I would love to know your thoughts. Of course, if you enjoyed today's video, please do hit the like button. It helps this video get out to more people, get more people thinking more consciously about their jewelry choices and whether traditions should be preserved through rigidly following templates that we suddenly decided were the template, or whether traditions are honored better when they're allowed to evolve, when we trust in the strength of the tradition to actually, the essence of the tradition to actually survive being expressed in many different ways. Of course, if you want to stay in touch or keep in touch with my videos, hit the notification bell and I welcome you to subscribe as well. Remember, because your jewelry should always be more than just an afterthought. And thank you for joining me today. Bye for now. I'll be back again soon.